I was not able to attend this morning, unfortunately, so I'm just curious by show of hands, how many people are here from the healthcare sector? A couple. And education? And ministry? Leadership? And other? Maybe yell out when I'm got some grad students here. Okay, great, thank you. Well, I want this to be definitely a time to glean the expertise of our panel. Clearly, we have a lot of expertise sitting at the front of the room, but also from you as people who are out there in the field doing your jobs on a day-to-day basis. If you have questions that come up for you as we're talking up here, by all means, please do feel free to ask as we go. I think sometimes if we wait till the end, you kind of lose your thunder, or it doesn't fit anymore. So please do ask as we go along. This is your panel too. So you can see our question here. According to the most recent participation report card that came out for children and youth, 3/4 of Canadian children participate in organized sport. So 75%, that's pretty good. However, according to the 24-hour movement guidelines, only 1 in 3 Canadian children and youth meet the recommendation for 60 minutes of moderate, vigorous physical activity daily. So for the panel, based on your respective areas of expertise, what do you think is behind this discrepancy?
Should I go first? Going first in line?
Sure.
Have you been to a practice? So I think a lot of what we had touched on earlier, the no laps, no lines, no lectures, and I know Rita talked about that as well, is that even though they're going to practice, the amount of vigorous participation, especially in the skill development world, is very minimized. So how many times they actually touch the soccer ball or the puck is very minimized, and their heart rate isn't getting up to where we expect it should, based on the structure of the practices. The other reality, I think, is when we look at their week, it doesn't happen every day. It's not like us as adults where we choose to go. They have other things and other responsibilities in terms of what they are doing. So they, sometimes they practice 3 times a week, and depending on your level, maybe 4 times a week. So that influences it as well in terms of the busy parent and schedule. The last part would probably be testing. The last part would probably be access. I think when we look at sport models and organized sport, there is a cost to it, and I think the kids that, for the majority, if we look at our populations, I know we come from Hamilton. It's a very poverty-stricken city, so 1 in 6 live in poverty. So I think access to those sports it has something to do with that as well.
Just to build on Mark's comments, I think part of the challenge as well is outside of the 1 or 2 practices and 1 or 2 games a week, depending on the sport, depending on the age that they're at, there's very little opportunity for kids to just go and play. I know when I was growing up, that's what we did the majority of the time. It wasn't the sport we necessarily did. It was we met in the park, we met at the hockey rink, we were in our neighborhoods. A lot of that has been deconstructed, largely through the perception of public fear, for the most part, that I mentioned this earlier. It is adults that are restricting the bit of the roaming and the freedom of children. We need to find that sweet spot. How do we build that village where parents perceive that kids are safe? Just as an example, I live in British Columbia. Some of you may know Steve Nash. Steve Nash is from British Columbia. He is probably one of the best examples of a kid who did intentional practice more than anybody you could ever imagine. And how does a 6'1" white kid from Canada become a 2-time MVP of the NBA? Intentional practice with his friends, engaged all the time, playing tons of different sports. It's really hard for that to happen today. So I think the disconnect is that sport delivers this, the rest of society delivers that, and they don't line up.
Can I build on something that you said, that sort of finding that sweet spot of fear, which we know is really prevalent, one bottom line piece of advice to sort of attenuate that fear and enable that free play, what would you say?
RCMP statistics, 1 in 14 million chance that your child will be abducted by a stranger. Pretty telling to me, but then people will buy lottery tickets with way bigger odds than that. Yeah, I mean, we're killing them slowly. We just are.
I think to build off the free play, I think parents are such a, I mean, they are the role models, right? And socioeconomically right now, or socioculturally, I think right now we're a very stressed culture. So parents both parents more often than not are working a job or more than one. So when we look at where the kids, like I think one of the stats on the website there was pretty telling, because it was about 37% of parents were saying that they engage in active behavior. So when we're talking about our kids, we need to be talking about our parents and what kind of observation the kids are getting within the home. Now, it's a very difficult world right now, I think, that we live in, to try and get that activity in. The fact that the kids are at school for most of the day and the parents are at work for most of the day, and then we look at where does that free play come in. I think schools definitely play a massive role in trying to get that built into the actual curriculum. And I know that a lot of teachers are fighting an uphill battle based on who's in government and all that sort of thing. But I think it's something we need to be conscious of. And then the fact that we tell our kids to be more active and we're not, it's for those parents out there trying to tell your kid one thing and doing another. Kids are pretty bright. They're going to look at what's going on around them. If parents are tuning out, they're not attuned to their kids' needs, or they're not participating with their kids, it's going to be pretty difficult for those kids to look at that and say, we're building healthy lifestyles for the future, right? So I think that's maybe one side of it, but I'll let John add to that.
These are all great comments, and maybe I just want to build on something Mark said earlier about they're not getting, have you seen a practice? They're not moving much at practices, definitely not vigorously. And I'm also concerned about how much involvement in organized sport teaches kids how to play outside of it. Not only do they maybe not have the opportunity to, maybe we've taken away that option, but even how much does organized sport teach kids how to be creative? How much choice do they have in organized sports about how to play, what they want to do? And then, so do they learn those skills? So when they do have the opportunity, is it foreign to them? And do they even know how to engage in that kind of activity to get some more movement in? So yeah, that's something to consider as well, I think.
Yeah, and I think building off of that made me think of this notion of responsibility. And I apologize if you talked about this morning, but who should the onus fall on to teach kids those types of skills? Is it the education system? Is it parents? Is it collaborative?
I don't have a question, I just have a comment. I also think it's important to take into consideration their First Nation northern communities where they've never had the opportunity to be a part of an organized sport, and then all their lives they're up in a remote community from grade K to grade 8, and they transition to go to high school. Let's say it's under Verbeek, there's no high schools in those northern communities. Sorry for lack of a better word, they're screwed really in a sense because they don't have those skills built. So I also think that's huge to consider. And then a lot of coaches might feel frustrated. They don't know how to effectively coach these kids that are that far behind with their skill sets, if that makes any sense. So I also think that's a huge contributor.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting as well. We, research tells us that the more competent you feel at an activity, the more motivated you'll be to take part in that. And so, yeah, in that type of situation, how competent do these youth feel when they're already all of a sudden thrust into an environment that's almost entirely focused around organized sport? And if they don't feel competent, it's just another barrier for them to engage in that, to get their movement in.
And I would just add, I think free play is really what's at hand here. I know Mark was talking about it earlier. I just caught the end of it, but I think our culture from a sports standpoint, and I've grown up playing sports, I think probably we all have here, and it's in North America, especially Thunder Bay as well. I think seems to be on another level. If you've been to a minor hockey game at all, it's a bunch of you don't see that behavior anywhere from what you see in the stands at a minor hockey game from parents. The competitiveness, which I don't think competitiveness in and of itself is necessarily a bad thing, but it seems to be the onus of minor sports right now. It seems to be the focus of it, and the win at all costs, and the fear of missing out from your child. And I think we're gearing. I mean, I think 75% of 3 or 4 year olds right now are in structured sport, which is pretty telling. Yet the level of free play outside of those sports is incredibly low. I don't have the stats off the top of my head, but yeah. That's okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and that sort of parent looking over your shoulders at everything is completely diminishing creativity. I think it completely diminishing confidence, and so when they go off on their own and they play a game, the point of the game is to keep the game going, right? So what are you going to do? You're going to include as many people as possible so that you actually have a game to play, right? You're going to learn how to communicate with kids that way. You're going to learn how to argue, right? You're going to learn a lot of life lessons in this free play that is not the same as mom and dad saying, okay, here's the game you're going to play, here's the rules. One kid doesn't like it, they leave, now we don't have a game anymore. So it's amazing what can happen with unstructured free play. But going back to the fear of, I don't know, abduction or injury or liability or whatever it is, that is diminishing in our culture big time.
So I'm going to say it because I will say what the elephant is in the room, and I think it's education's role. And the reason why I think that is that I know in the place and spaces that I come from, it is a pedagogical progression that starts from an early age. And if we see the kids in JK and we see them all the way up till grade 12, I think education needs to take more of an onus in building these fundamental movements, skills, and less of a focus on the other two, numeracy and literacy, and really start building in that third literacy. And you can call it music literacy, and you can call everything else but that. But the reality is we're movers for life. And the last time you will move is when you die, right? Like that's basically it. So we're movers for life. And I think as an education system, we've lost that. We think that they have to read to be successful. They have to be able to make calculations. And as it was alluded to, competence and confidence and the fact of conflict resolution and all those things that we want them to learn happens through activity. And some of the stuff that's happening in Ontario right now with our phys ed curriculum and what we're doing with that, and I don't want to get this into a political thing, but that influences what we expect out of the schools. And if we as parents, as people in the community, as teachers, as early educators, if we don't start stepping up and saying stuff and saying, hey, this is a responsibility for us, and we might have to take on not only the education from a standpoint of teaching the kids, but we might also have to teach the parents. Because I'll tell you, having a son that's now in grade 4, trying to learn the grade 3 math was super hard, right? The processes and not the right answer. So we've had to do some relearning, and my wife and I are both educators. She's core French and I'm in phys ed. So again, we might have to take the lead role in that. But I think that if we're looking at it as a pedagogy and something that is research-based and good for kids, we need to start asking why it's not happening in our school spaces so that these situations don't happen. And this is, it could be Aboriginal communities, it could be in my place and space at-risk communities. The kids all go to school. Right? They're all there for 300 minutes every day. So why does 250 or 275 of those minutes have to be science, math, Why can't it be phys ed every day? Why can't it have, my son has 3 recesses right now. 3. Like he goes 20 minutes in the morning, 15 in the afternoon, and then he gets a 30 again after lunch. Because our school system, where I'm at, the school I'm at, believes in that free play and the things that are taught and learned through that. So if you have kids and it's not happening, it's time to start happening, right? So I would think that it's an education thing. And I know there's a lot of educators in here, and I know we're fighting the fight, but if you're in the public system, who makes the most noise? The parents. That's who they answer to. So when we get into situations like that, it's the parents' voice. It's the kids' experience that we need to put in the forefront, the why we are doing this. And I really think it's an education, maybe as the front runner, but definitely a community approach.
Just throwing something else out there, because you talked about education, but the impact of liability and participation rates. I used to be on a board, Pearson, for one of the elementary schools, and we had this giant discussion about kids being able to go and do off-site food watch visits. So, and you're thinking of risk piece to it. And I found myself actually going back about liability culture change and how we no longer do the things that we used to do. And the discussion that I was having with the principal at the time was whether or not to allow kids to go in snowboard, because it was deemed as a high risk. And I found myself arguing with a phys ed teacher, a graduate master's, which I thought was really kind of ironic, because I'm the parent, I'm trying to debate that she's doing these things and allowing the kids to go out there, but she's so engrossed in the whole liability piece that she completely forgot about the fundamental reason why she's obviously teaching and the benefits of that. And I think that that's a real obvious thing that needs to continue to be taught. And even something as simple as policies where kids after school can't go back onto the playgrounds and actually use the equipment that's there and play basketball or do whatever because of the liability piece. So is there examples of how to get around that, or how do we work within the education and other areas where we can address that?
That's a really great comment, and I think bringing in that notion of policy and culture are really prevalent. And sort of leads me to another question that I had, is that striking that balance between what was formerly called risky play to adventurous play, and that and being safe and not having to worry about litigation. What recommendations? Where do you start? What recommendations do you have for that?
It's interesting because the risk aversion you bring up is interesting. At the Ontario Physical Literacy Summit last year, there was a discussion around. We actually had the person responsible in Hamilton for liability, and Hamilton had paid out $15 to $20 million in settlements. So it's happening. We're litigious in Canada. We're not as litigious as our neighbors to the south, but it does happen. There are people that are taking advantage of the system, for sure. I think when we're talking about risk adverse in the playground with your young child, that's a parent education piece. We need to get collectively everybody on at least knowledgeable to move to the point of being wise, because you can have lots of knowledge and not be wise. That happens all the time. But we need to get people to make better decisions. Always fretting about your kid is probably the worst thing you can do for your kid in many cases, because you are making them nervous. You are raising their anxiety level. And so I don't know the cause of that, but I think we need the more we can get parents to talk about it as to why they're like that and how we get them, it's going to be better for the kids. Because right now, the situation for the kids is driven by the adults and the adults' behavior and the adults' beliefs. And until that changes, nothing's changing. So we need to get at parents first. And I think that needs to be in any policy. So whether it's through school PACs or parent advisory councils or whatever, they need to be engaged. And to Mark's point, in the school setting, I think liability reduces if partnerships between recreation, education, health, and sport are stronger. They're better because they know each other, they trust each other. These are the sort of things I'll talk a little bit tonight about how we make a better community, a tighter community. Right now, everybody's solo. Everybody does their own thing. They do it in isolation. Why do we not build schools and rec centers on the same footprint? It's the stupidest thing I've ever seen. In the city of Richmond in British Columbia, there are 4 high schools on the same footprint as a recreation center. These people live in the same community. They work generally from the same tax dollar. It is ridiculous that this stuff happens, but we as a community let it happen all the time. So to Mark's point, we gotta do something about it. You want to start talking?
So I've sorry, I don't want to jump you guys, but the Ontario School Insurance Board, OSB, as you guys all know, we actually I did some work in policy making, especially around concussions. That was when some of my writing came down, and we really looked at liability. And when I think about the snowboarding, for example, for me, there needs to be some type of progression that leads to that snowboarding. And I think if we look at what the Ontario safety guidelines look like, and they've been adopted as the provincial standard now, or minimum standard anyways, about how you do things. And then thinking about the place and space I'm in right now, where kids break their arms and people don't get sued. And most of the people that, or not most of them, but a lot of the parents that are in my place and space are actually lawyers. So I think that has something to do with it. I think when parents understand that there's some risk associated with play, and that it is a part of learning and growing, and there has been diligence, because I would say, and I know who came from the Hamilton board, I know who it was because they sat on that, and we talk about that, a lot of it because of, the word just left me, there was some negligence there. So it was either a supervision issue, there wasn't a progression, and that's usually why they have to settle, because they're trying to protect the teachers. So if we have good things in place and good progressions, and the conversations as a parent might be, well, how can you prepare them so that I can take them snowboarding? What are you doing? And that might be where the conversation starts. Or maybe you have an expertise in snowboarding and you want to share that with the school. Because again, at the start, it might be something like, hey, well, why do I got to do that? But then if we work together, it might get to that point, and maybe snowboarding will happen down the road with some. Mm-hmm. It usually does. Like, teachers are usually a little apprehensive at the start, but if it makes sense and the kids are like in Thunder Bay, like if you're not playing in the snow, like, come on, right? Like, what are you doing then, right? So again, if it makes sense and we start with that why, we're doing it. But I think from a litigation standpoint, in my experience anyways, that if you have those progressions, it's age and stage appropriate, it makes sense, you're diligent on what you do, so supervision, helmets are fitted properly, I think you're going to win those liability battles. Now, if you go rogue, start doing bungee jumping from the top of your school and stuff like that, that's probably not going to go over too well. But I think there are some mechanisms and processes in place to keep teachers safe and to educate parents on what their role is in terms of the experience, but how educators can support that. So if you're going to Colorado to go on this massive ski trip, and you want to work with a phys ed teacher and teach them how to slide and cross-country ski and do that, I think that would go a long way. You're not going to Colorado, right? But you can help support that trip to Colorado. So
Intersectoral collaboration is what I'm hearing.
I think
so
that,
far.
yeah, I think that's in the end.
Communicating with parents, educating parents, that's really important. Another question?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I would clap to that
Who wants
too.
to do that?
It's the only time you're actually going to have them on the hotspot.
Yeah.
You want to add that?
I think I'm pretty good with that too. I like those answers.
Any other questions at the moment? Or there's a little bit. I want to go back to something that, are you stretching or is that a question? Stretching. Sure. Something that Mark had said about the education system and the heavy role that it plays, how much time students spend there. And one of the studies that I recently conducted with my team was looking at the experiences of teachers and administrators with regards to delivering phys ed. And what one of the findings was that a
they didn't feel like they knew how. And they wanted more professional development. They wanted more community as part of the 1 year in junior college. Now, two, how do you make changes there? What do we do with that?
It's happening right here, right? Like, this is it right here, right? Like, you guys are the spark. How many people are teachers? Put your hands up again. That's how the conversation started. I was the same. I sat in Drew's workshop like you're sitting here now, right? And it's that conversation. We are resourced to death. So if you can get a collection of group or maybe one friend and to look at how you can change things or make things better for kids, I think that's how it starts. It's the spark that kind of pushes things in different directions and makes things change. And it could be a conversation with a parent, or it could be, I'm trying this, what do you think about this? And I think this part, or these type of venues and avenues are part of that process. And the emphasis of, or de-emphasizing the elite in sport as an outcome, and more the movement and lifelong participation in life as quality movers, is where we need to shift our focus. So PE is really trying to do that, but it needs the help of people that experience these things, right? And we need to keep those, and again, I'm speaking from an educational landscape, we need to ask PE teachers the big questions when all they're doing is teaching sports. Like, we need to ask them about, well, how does free play feel? My kid's 6. Why is he doing a basketball unit? Right? Like, we got to start having those conversations and supporting them in that, hey, I had this great talk. I know this great guy. He's local. Talks about movement and across the ages. You know, maybe he could come in and do, talk about some free play and what that does for kids. And get that, like, again, I think it's a spark that starts it. It doesn't have to be this massive thing. And I think phys ed doesn't have to be the leader in that space. Like, I think it can come from numeracy, and we just saw Reed's stuff around the brain lighting up in the Hillman study and what that does for learning and getting kids ready to learn, and the neuroscience behind that. And I think if we can get more people plugged into that side too, because in the end we want kids to learn, right? So how we get there, we know that music and phys ed and movement can get them ready to do those things in a better way.
I was just going to say too, I think grassroots really, we don't realize the power of grassroots, of the commons, and the influence that has politically. We often, like Mark was talking about, advocating and having groups like this, but I think even how we use our spaces, how we use our public spaces, like, are all of us in the room using those spaces with our kids right now, and you wonder why funding gets cut to certain areas. And part of it's tough. We're in a bind sometimes politically because we're waiting on the next political party to come in and hopefully do the right thing. And in Ontario, we all know from a public standpoint the effects of the recent one too. But I think we need to lead by example. If you are a parent in the room, we need to show the kids how to get to these public spaces, whether it's by active transportation, where they are, what they mean for free play, and what they mean for the development of athleticism. And this is something we were talking about outside of the room before we started, is from my role, I'm seeing a huge drop in athleticism of kids. And I don't mean from a sports standpoint, I mean from what their bodies are capable of doing in any situation. So for example, we're so specialized right now with sport that we're losing the ability to take a kid to try a new activity and feel confident that they can even start, right? To join a yoga class, there's a great example. How many people feel like they have the prerequisites to join a yoga class? You don't need to be an expert in yoga, but if you've moved your body around before in many different planes in many different ways, chances are you can jump into a yoga class and do okay. You're not going to be an expert, but you probably feel the confidence to do that, right? So from our kids' standpoint, I think that they need to really understand that general development of athleticism that was really very apparent. You look at some Eastern European countries, and some of these adults who haven't done gymnastics in 30 years can jump onto a pommel horse, and no problem at all. It comes right back instantly. But they did that growing up. Gymnastics is fabulous, and I don't just mean put your kid in a gymnastics class, but in PE, and having somebody either being brought in or actually teaching the basic elements of human movement to phys ed teachers is so key, so that they can inspire those kids to actually try something different, try something risky, like within reason, but try something risky, so they're not afraid to go out and try these new activities later in life, right? Do you have a question? Yeah.
So about the community, my tried the money for this concept, and we developed it somewhere, but it's about building these areas for people to play at. How do we do that ourselves when we're investing our own time, our own money? We drive every second week to Minneapolis so that they can compete and ride a bike. When here we are in Thunder Bay, people should be riding bikes. Sorry, is it on? Okay. So my summary was about the public spaces. Like, how do we develop those so the kids can use them? When you use your analogy, you're talking about a yoga class, which costs money. Lots of people send their kids to hockey, which costs money. But if we could have these community spaces that were like pump tracks and BMX tracks, so the kids could go there every day after school, all the time, and play at these places, how do we get them? How do we get the Thunder Bay to build them? And we did try that too. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Pockets of it happening across the country. Sport has a huge voice. It's very fragmented. Soccer doesn't want to talk to hockey. Hockey doesn't want to talk to baseball. Baseball doesn't want to talk to lacrosse. They're all competing for the same market. Which is the stupidest thing in the world. It's a dumb economic theory. Unfortunately, we have a lack of solicitation and volunteers that are instructors to actually do the job. I'm running a project in Southbury, White Rock, 110,000 people. The local soccer club is about 3,000 kids. Minor hockey, about 1,000 kids. On their own, they came together and they worked out a schedule because on the West Coast we play soccer. It would be outside of soccer. Soccer and hockey actually compete in the same country. So they actually sat down and worked out a schedule for U10 and under being their two clubs. On their own. They've developed a database to be able to track kids coming and going in their sports. They've got hockey in it, they've got soccer in it, they've got rugby in it, they've got dance in it. And it's the beginnings of what I think is going to be authentic. Because sport needs to come to the table as a collective for capital projects. If you want anything built, you need to work together. So if the pool is the next big need in the community, then everybody needs to get behind the pool, because then the next thing is going to be the soccer field. And then the next thing is going to be the BMX track or whatever. But when a single entity wants something to happen, then you look like a special interest group and you only care about yourself, right? So anything that needs to happen in the community needs to be done collectively. And so part of the energy needs to be working together. So you need to work together first, then go after your stuff. Yeah, so go to the swim club. That's what I mean. Like, you need to think bigger. It's not just the people that do the same thing you do.
Yeah, and I don't want to comment. I don't know anything about your particular situation, but it does seem that Thunder Bay's uniquely positioned now to maybe take advantage of some of these situations or ideas. Smaller, a lot of grassroots sport and recreation. That are keen not only to grow and to do it innovatively. We had I don't know if anyone was at the sports summit that was back in the summer, I think. There were a lot of different sport clubs and groups represented there that are really keen to get kids doing different sports and working together. and building better athletes and following some of this research. So if we could get some of those groups together and working together, I think we're primed for that type of collaboration.
There's a big example of a big multi-sport winter sport club in Vail. And you have snowboard, you have freestyle, you have alpine, which if anybody knows winter sport, alpine doesn't work with anybody, right? Like, and then cross country is actually there too. Like all four of them are together in the same club. And the kids, as they're growing up, get introduced to all of it. All of it. Then they make choices as to where they want to go, right? We provide opportunities. And unfortunately, again, because it's volunteer and people tend to be hyper-focused on what they're doing, is they don't see the big picture, right? And it's hard. It's totally hard. So how do, as a community, do we come together and think, play the long game, like this is not a short term, this is a long game. How do we actually build the infrastructure of coordination and collaboration to get the things you want that get built into a plan? It's the sort of thing that we need to do. Like I say, we're going to talk a little bit about it tonight. We're starting to do it in communities across the country. We have a hospital foundation that gave us $500,000. They buy stuff and build stuff for hospitals. They don't invest in local communities to do a physical literacy project for 5 years. Stuff's changing. The landscape is changing. And we need to be ahead of the game on that. And there are opportunities to do things differently and not settle for the way it's always been done, because I know it's frustrating as hell.
What was the mandate for our hospital's foundation or board? Prevention. There's a great idea, and I think that like I think the multi-sport thing is that Drew was talking about is bang on, and I don't think we do that enough. But what we do have, like what John was saying, like the clubs here in Thunder Bay, from a recreational standpoint and a competitive standpoint, but the clubs that are here, I mean, I work with a lot of the cross-country ski athletes from the National Training Development Center, but outside of that, just that elite spectrum, is this insanely amazing community for cross-country skiing in Thunder Bay. We have the best cross-country ski community in North America, by far. So you go to a Nordic Fest, which is a fundraiser for them, and you fill the Polish Hall every single year. And they want, and it's not just about the team. It's not just about these, few at the top here. It's actually about like taking Norway's approach to it, which is how do we get so many kids involved to have fun? Like I think it's 12 years old before they start keeping score with most of their things, with most of their sports, right? They interviewed the head of the Norway, I think it was either ski team or president of the whole national club, and he was just saying, like, you guys think this is crazy, but we think that actually enjoying a sport and a culture and everything that the outdoor life has to offer actually helps our performance. And of course, we saw that at forever with Norway. But I think we need to get these clubs together, like get the cross-country ski club, in the winter and look at whether it's multi-purpose paths that we want to develop, not just for one. Let's look together at how to build those, and maybe with the BMX parks, looking at some of the other snowboarding and clubs like that can actually work together in some way to say this is not just about raising money for this project, but that's on the agenda. And like you're saying, long term, I think is the big focus, because if we just come at it from an individual standpoint, you're not going to get any help that way, and we're probably not going to get too far. That's been based on our economic model for far too long, and we need to sort of rebel against that a little bit and show a lot of those. And then the politicians and then the city will start to take note a little bit more, but we can't wait on them, right? As we've noted.
I'm starting to hear across all of these discussions is strength in numbers, is having champions for different causes, which all of you are. You're here today taking time away from your day-to-day. And maybe I would add like patience, because it can be a hard road, but clearly with perseverance you can see really positive change. I am aware of the time. Can we go nutritional or 5 minutes? Okay. So I'd like to ask one more question if I could that I prepared, and then open it up to ensure that you have any sort of burning questions answered before you leave. I think Mark mentioned about socially disadvantaged groups and thinking about sort of all the populations, access to opportunity. We do have a disproportionate amount of children and youth in town who their family struggles to make ends meet. And how can we foster physical activity for these children who maybe lack opportunity? They can't engage in organized sports. And back to your point about the reserves as well. I was just going to say that at the end of the day, it's all based on relationships. If you don't respect relationships with your students, make them feel like they matter, all of that will align with your strategy.
So integrating in the classroom and being inclusive. Yeah, and inside the classroom, outside of the classroom, we know there's a lot of time spent as soon as the kids go home. We talked about technology yet too much, but certainly that's a big elephant in the room. Where do we start?
So I'm an individual. I live in the country. So for some families, even in the country, there's like rural areas, their families are out of the parenting because it's very difficult sometimes to get your child back to school and back to school. So I don't know if you know, I noticed that when I was a school bus driver. And so over the years, we decided, let's make our yard into a play area so that we can help our community be active. So that is exactly what we have done. So we have people who know how to play football. We have soccer players. We actually had an NHL player. We just call them up and say, hey, are you willing to be available on this day? So usually on a Sunday right after dinner or supper, that's when everybody knows. You come down to our place, we're going to be playing something. And a lot of the times, children are afraid to even start something because we, the adults, have taught them to be afraid. But to show a child that you can play as well opens the world to them. And I've seen it over and over again. And regarding the relationships, I was a school bus driver, and I would introduce myself to all the families. I even sent out letters at the beginning of winter to say, okay, on Fridays we're going to be doing some skating as long as you've got helmets and skates. Plus, we had people donate, so I have my barn full of equipment for children to come and play. So we try to get rid of those barriers, but I know, like I say, I'm one individual, but even one person can make a small little difference in our community. I just don't know how to get to the next level to get politicians involved. So, there. Bree wants to talk. I don't want to talk.
Oh, thanks. Can you hear me? Is that working? Yeah. Okay, I came here today because I've been in touch with the Sierra Club. Do you know the Sierra Club? They have a program in the Maritimes, in Halifax and Prince Edward Island, called Wild Child. And it's after school, getting kids out in natural spaces after school. And they want to expand, and they are willing to mentor and to do insurance, to help with liability insurance. So I'm trying to get that going in Thunder Bay, if anyone's interested in helping with that. There is also, I'd like to mention, there's a forest school in Guelph called Maplewood that only contracts to school boards. So they are taking classes of kids outdoors, like for an afternoon a week, and not individuals, or after school things. So they're getting that school time free play. Anyway, that's what I have to say. And if you're interested in the Wild Child, I did bring a printout with me for contact and some more information. Thank you.
On that note of outdoor education and nature, as a supply teacher with both boards, I see every single school from JK up to grade 12. And we have some really good outdoor classrooms that are very underused. In my observation is they're not used very much. And my inclination, I don't know how many of you remember that one of the trends 20 years ago was to focus on Gardner's multiple intelligences. Remember, hands up if you remember Gardner and the multiple intelligence. I really related to the outdoor one, the naturalist one, and the kinesthetic. There's artistic music. Just look up Gardner, Gardner, I think. And if we could, there was a time when at Oliver Road School, for instance, all the kids who identified with the natural world, like as their primary way of learning, they all got together in one group on Monday, like 6-year-olds, 12-year-olds, and they all did an activity that way. All I'm saying is, as a supply teacher, I try to take the lesson and, if at all possible, incorporate it to, well, incorporate the outdoors with science, even music. Somebody mentioned doing writing outside. Like, our kids are, they don't know it maybe, but they're starving for being outside. And if we can implement that each day, like even once a week, look at your own school ground. It doesn't. You don't have to get on a bus and go somewhere. You can use your own school ground to teach science, biology, math, any subject. Okay.
This is probably something that you all will say, but I think this is just a lot of, these are great ideas and a lot of energy in the room, and let's reach out and connect and make relationships with each other and get things going. Elections coming up. It's a small community here. We can make change much easier here than maybe in other places. So let's make it happen.
I was just going to add that I think zooming that out to one of the previous comments to neighborhoods. I mean, think about what we can do within neighborhoods. You know, just talking to your neighbors about some of these problems. Maybe you don't have access to a space. And I know there was a project in Montreal with some of the laneways recently that were being unused, some of the back lanes. And we have, anybody born in Thunder Bay understands how many bloody black back lanes there are in Thunder Bay. And they started to just use them as green space and start planting some gardens or using it as a walkway. And all of a sudden they started to green them, and they were greened walkways and accessible pathways for people to get from one area of the city to the other. And that started just on the individual neighborhood level. So that's just one example, but I think when we're talking about all of these grassroots changes, you don't realize the power that you have just in this in a conversation with one other person. You might be able to connect these people together. And I think that's going to have far more power than waiting for a certain political party to come in and fund certain projects, although it's helpful. They need to see it working first, right? So that would be my 2 cents on it.